Hey guys, welcome back. So this video today is going to be all about mushroom jar lids, or lids used for mushroom cultivation. I've been getting a lot of questions in the comment section of my previous videos about lids, specifically what lids to use in specific scenarios. And also I've had some people who are saying they're losing their grows because of contamination on the filter membrane of the lids that they're using. And I touched on that briefly in some of my previous videos, but I wanted to do a video exclusively talking about just different lid types used for mushroom cultivation. I'm specifically going to focus on lids used for grain spawn and for liquid culture, because that's mostly what I do. I don't do any grain to grain transfers. I just do LC right to grain. That's how I get my grows started. But I'm going to touch on a little bit of everything here, and I also want to talk about how to control airflow in and out of your jars through your filter membranes, and also how to prevent contamination on your filter membranes. What happens is, a lot of people don't realize this, but your filter membranes can actually get contaminated. So if they stay moist for too long, you can get mold germinating right on your filter membranes, and once that mold germinates there, it's just going to punch right through and contaminate your whole grow and trash it. So I'm going to talk all about that today. In the other room, I have basically every lid I've ever used laid out, so I'm going to go over all of it with you, and I'm going to explain to you what I use in certain scenarios, and some lids that I used to use that I don't use anymore and why, and basically the lids that I'm using now, and the ones that I would recommend to you as a grower. So I'm gonna flip the camera around, we'll go into the other room and we'll take a look. We're gonna start with grain jar lids. We'll start off with our big boy here. This is the Mount Olive pickle jar that I featured in our mastering the 23 quart Presto pressure canner video. And if you're gonna do grain in these big jars like this, again, this will hold around 3.5 pounds of grain, I believe, and that's a lot of grain. So when you do a jar that size, I really recommend you use Tyvek. And that's what I've used here. This is a full disc of 1443R Tyvek from DuPont. And I just have a cable tie here under the lip of the jar, holding it nice and tight on there. I should talk about Tyvek quality too. A lot of people, when they first start out growing mushrooms, they just want to go to the post office and get like cheap postal Tyvek. Don't do that. You definitely want to use quality Tyvek. I mentioned this quickly in one of my other videos, but I order my Tyvek from this Into the Wind company in Colorado. They sell kite making supplies, and they sell this Tyvek, I guess, for making kites, but it's also super useful for mushroom growing. Again, this is 1443R Tyvek from DuPont. And what I do is I just use like a Gladware container that's about the size of the disc I'm going to need. And I trace it out here on the Tyvek, and you can fold it over multiple times. You can cut like multiple layers at once. I think up to like 6, 7, 8 layers at once with some good sharp scissors. And just cut your discs right out of this, and you need good quality Tyvek. That postal Tyvek will not really protect your jars. I mean, some people can get away with it if they have a clean environment, but it's just too thin. The weave's not tight enough, and mold spores can navigate their way through that much more easily than they can with this quality Tyvek. So the full Tyvek lid has its positives and negatives, like most things. Like I said, if you're going to use these big boy jars here, and you can fit 4 of these in a Presto 23 quart, which allows you to do like over, I think it's like 13 pounds of grain spawn in one run with these big jars. But you need a lot of airflow to get to the bottom, to get to that grain at the bottom. Otherwise, your grain isn't going to fully colonize. So this full Tyvek lid allows you to do that. So what I do is it has some memory to it, so you can kind of get it centered, fold it down onto the jar, and then put a zip tie on there nice and tight. This is a 14-inch cable tie, and you need the 14 inchers to go around these big jars. And sometimes in the pressure cooker, this Tyvek will kind of balloon a little bit, and your cable tie will loosen up just a little bit from the heat. So you do need to kind of pull these back down and cinch them back down as soon as you pull them out of the pressure cooker to make sure they're nice and sealed. I cover that more in my Presto pressure canner video, and I show it in more depth there as well. You can also use the full Tyvek lid for like a quart jar, like you see here. Just make sure you get that, when you put that cable tie on there, get it on nice and tight, like as tight as you can. And you may have to cinch it back down a little bit when you pull these out of the pressure canner. Now, the drawback to this full Tyvek lid is obviously you're getting a lot of flow, because you have a full filter membrane lid here. So you're going to get a lot of airflow into your jar, and it can be too much sometimes. It can dry out the top layer of your grain. So if you do see the top layer of your grain drying out, what you want to do is just use like a foil lid like this and just loosely place it over that Tyvek lid. But you don't want to do this right away, because when you PC these jars, it doesn't matter what you do. When you run them through the PC, there's going to be moisture on the lid when you pull them out. And you need to let that moisture dry out, or else what can happen is the mold will, if this is really moist, this Tyvek, and it stays moist for a while, mold can germinate right on your Tyvek. And once mold germinates on your Tyvek or your filter disc or whatever, it's just going to punch right through there, and it's going to ruin your grow. So you have to allow these a little bit of time to dry out. So what I do is I'll pull them out of the pressure cooker, go ahead and shoot them up with your liquid culture. So you're going to inject right through this Tyvek, right in the center, and then just use some clear nail polish, do a couple dabs on there, and seal your injection hole. And then I'm going to move these into a clear storage tote. Okay, and that's where they're going to colonize. I never let jars, whether it be liquid culture or grain, whatever, I never let them colonize in open air. Always put them in a storage tote that just controls the airflow around them. Airflow can be your enemy too, because it carries obviously contaminants. So these are always colonizing in storage totes. So once you shoot these full of liquid culture, like I said, seal your injection hole and move them to your storage tote, and let them sit in there with no foil on them for at least like 2 to 3 days, and let this Tyvek get nice and dry. That's going to ensure that you don't get mold germination on your Tyvek. And at that point, once you give them a few days, you can just kind of loosely cover them with a foil lid, and that'll keep the high airflow going into this jar from drying out your very top layer of spawn there. The other thing you can do is, when your jar is about halfway colonized, if it's looking a little dry on top, you can give your jar a little shake, mix everything up, and that usually takes care of it too. But whether you're using these big jars or a quart-sized jar, if you're going to go full Tyvek lid, you definitely want to just let them dry out uncovered for a few days, and then just loosely cover them with a foil lid. A couple other styles of grain jar lids that I don't use here anymore is these are synthetic filter discs, and I got these from a mycology supplier quite a while ago, and these didn't work great for me. They're really tough to inject through. They're not really designed for that because they're thicker. They're really better for grain to grain transfer. But they're basically cut to fit. This is a wide mouth. You can get them wide mouth or standard size. And they're cut to fit right on the top of the jar. And then you just, screw your ring down on there, and boom, you got a lid right there. So if you guys do grain to grain transfer, this is something to consider. One problem I found with these though is that sometimes the moisture will be retained under the ring here in this little lip, and you'll actually get mold germination issues right around this ring here with these filter discs. And I actually ordered some grain jars from a supplier one time, and the jars came, and like I think 2 or 3 of them were contaminated from that exact issue. So it wasn't just me that had that issue, they were having it too. Basically, this under this ring would retain some moisture and you'd get some mold germination there, so that's an issue. This is another style here. This is old school right here. This does work, and basically all you do is drill a hole in your lid, canning jar lid, and stuff it full of polyfill. Polyfill is just, it's the same stuff used to fill like pillows or stuffed animals. And it's not a perfect seal by any means. None of this is really, obviously, none of these are hermetically sealed. But this is pretty porous, really, in the grand scheme of things. But it will work. You can inject right through this. But definitely, if you're going to go the polyfill route, you're going to want to cover this with a foil lid. So take it out of the pressure cooker. You know, you can probably pressure cook it with the foil lid on. Take the lid off, shoot your LC in. Polyfill dries a lot more easily and is less prone to contamination than some of the other filter media. And then go ahead and, you know, obviously put your ring on and then cover it with a foil lid. So that's a few different styles you guys can use for grain jars. But the moral of the story is the moisture on your filter media can be a big problem. It can cause you to lose your jars, basically. You want to really focus on, okay, I pressure cooked my jar. I need to let my filter media dry out before I put any further covering on it. So that's pretty important. And the next jar I want to talk about is this guy right here. And these are the Micropose filter disc and injection ports. I'll put a link to these products in the description of the video again here. I discussed them in my liquid culture videos as well. These are great. I wish these were around when I first started growing mushrooms. This is kind of a hybrid lid because you can use this for grain or you can use it for liquid culture depending on the situation. These are actually, like, if you're just starting off and you just want to do basic grain jars injected with LC and you're doing quarts or pints, I would go with this style lid. These work awesome. You couldn't use filter discs this small, obviously, for a big jar like this, but if you're doing quarts and pints, this works fine. These are self-adhesive and they just come on these sheets like this. And the adhesive that they use on these, I don't know what it is, but it's good stuff. I mean, I've run these several times and there's no loss of adhesion or anything. They're working great. Just happened to be starting a run of wheat grain in quart jars with our favorite hybrid lids. So I wanted to show you guys what it looks like when you pull them out of the PC. I PC'd them last night for 90 minutes at 15 PSI. And they've had all night to cool, so they should be nice and room temp now. I'm still placing the foil lids over our Micropose hybrid lids when I put them in the PC. We're doing wheat grain, again, because it's cheap and plentiful in our area and it works great. So we're gonna sit these in front of the flow hood, right out of the PC in front of the flow hood. If you were using a still air box, you'd be placing them in a still air box at this point. We'll pull the foil lids off and we'll see what they look like. As I mentioned, with these hybrid lids, once you run them in the PC, you can just get rid of these foil lids. You don't have to use them anymore. But you can see, hopefully you guys can see, there's some moisture on the inside of the lid just from the steam in the PC, and there's also moisture on top of the lid. So that's what I mean. That moisture there can really burn you. If I was to just inoculate this and throw the foil lid back on, that synthetic filter disc would contaminate on us for sure. So I mentioned this style lid here will also work for liquid culture, which if you're a beginner and you don't want to have to deal with equalizing the pressure manually in your liquid culture jars, these are a good one to start out with. The filter disc will allow the pressure to equalize automatically after pressure cooking. You just have to be really careful. If you're going to draw LC out of these, when you tip the jar to pull with your syringe, you got to keep that filter disc up. Again, you don't want to keep getting your filter disc wet, or that's going to promote mold contamination. So what I do, I don't use these jars for jars that I want to pull syringes from. What I use these for is like when I want to do a grow with the mycelium flood method, like I use in my cordyceps video. I'll use jars like this because basically for cordyceps or the mycelium flood method, I want like as much super chunky mycelium as I can get as fast as I can get it, because those cordyceps cultures don't stay viable for very long. So I'll make the nutrient broth, inject some cordyceps LC in there, and especially if you use the peptone recipe that I showed you guys, combined with the breathability that this filter disc gives you, you'll get some awesome super chunky mycelium really quick that way. But if you're looking to start like your own culture library at home, if you just want to make some LC jars that you're gonna pull out of several times to start like grain jar grows, I suggest using a lid with no filter disc in it. So basically, this lid here is just has a 1/4 inch hole or 5/16, I don't remember, punched in it, drilled in it. And this is high temp RTV silicone. You can get it at the hardware store or any auto parts store. And you just goob some on both sides here. And you need to give it about 24 hours to cure, because it does take a while. But that gives you an awesome self-healing injection port that you can use time and time again. And these hold up for literally hundreds of uses. You could also use one of these micropose injection ports as well. I just started using these. I've run them several times. They work great. They seem to be holding up really well. I don't think they'll hold up as well as the RTV, but that remains to be seen. The RTV is super durable, especially if you goop it on there nice and thick. But obviously, if you don't have a filter disc, you do have to equalize the pressure manually when you're doing LC with these lids. But I cover that in my non-vented lid LC video. So if you want some more information on that, check that video out. I've tried a couple other injection ports over the years. These are some examples here. There's these hard red rubber ones and these blue ones. I got both of these different styles from mycology suppliers over the years, and I tried both. They just don't hold up. I wasn't impressed at all. They basically lost seal after several uses, and they just didn't hold up. If you want to make LC and start your own culture library, hold several species for up to a year, and repeatedly pull syringes from a stock jar, master jar like this, I recommend going with either the RTV method or these micropose injection ports. I do also use one of these foil lids on my LC, and that's just trying to control some airflow and prevent any potential contamination from getting to your lid or whatever. Probably not necessary, but that's just an extra step that I do. And it usually takes about 2 to 3 weeks for your liquid culture to colonize. And at that point, I'll put it in a small storage tote and put it in the fridge. And I have, like shoebox size storage totes with a bunch of these jars, bunch of different species in them. And that's for most species. Refrigerator temperature is good. If you get tropical species that don't like it really cold, like some Agaricus blazei, pink oyster, something like that, what I have is a wine fridge. And you can hold the wine fridge, around 60 degrees. And that seems to work really well for those tropical cultures. And if you don't want to do that, you could just store them at room temperature. Like my basement's basically 65 degrees all winter long, and that's fine for storing those tropical cultures at room temperature. So that's pretty much all the lids I have laid out here. And if you guys have any questions, definitely hit me up in comments. Basically, these micropose self-adhesive injection ports and filter discs are just all stars. I'm still running them and testing them, but they seem awesome so far. They're a great hybrid lid setup for beginners. You can do LC or grain in them. So they're awesome. Again, I'll post a link to their products in the description of the video. So hit me up if you have any other questions, guys, and hopefully this helps with your understanding of what lids to use when and how to control moisture to keep mold from germinating on your filter media and compromising your grows.